Thanks again for joining me. Today I am sitting down with Sam Jacobs, who is the founder of Revenue Collective. Now, Sam, for 15, 16 plus years, he's worked with a variety of companies as senior sales executive leadership. He's helped companies scale from $0 in revenue to over $300 million. He has significant operational expertise, sales expertise, emphasis on go-to-market strategy. He's worked in a variety of SaaS and recurring revenue businesses, including being a commercial operator at GLG, Livestream / Vimeo, the Muse, and Behavox. Now, what he's working on is the Revenue Collective, which was it started as a 100-member group, January 2019. Fast forward to 2020, there's over 1,400 and growing. Invite only. It's an invite-only global community of sales, marketing, revenue leaders. He's also the host of the Sales Hacker podcast, which has over 2,500 downloads. So, he's going to put me on the spot now and make sure that I'm asking good questions and whatnot. So I appreciate you joining me. I think that what you're doing is incredible. I don't think there's a lot of people doing similar types of invite only for revenue executives. So I'm curious what your background is like, how you came to what you're working on today, why it's important, and all of that. So I appreciate you sitting down.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to be here. And just a few stats just for the audience. Things are bigger than maybe you indicated, which is great. So Revenue Collective is actually just around 3,000 global members at this point.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. We're in probably over 100 cities all over the world. We got started in New York in 2016, and I can talk all about that. And then the Sales Hacker podcast actually gets about 40,000 downloads a month. So been doing that for a couple of years. But my background is I've been originally I grew up overseas. My parents were in the Foreign Service for the U.S. government, for the State Department, and then I came back and went to college at the University of Virginia. Came out of college in undergrad in 1999. It was the first .com boom, and I moved up to New York to do investment banking. Wasn't really into that very much. Felt a little too corporate for me, so I started a record label. That record label was not successful, and I call it Exercises in Poverty and Humility. And then I came back to New York in 2003, and that was really when my career as sort of what I am today began. And that's when I started a company that you mentioned called GLG, Gerson Lehrman Group. And that company was about $25 million in revenue when I joined. And I basically came in at the ground floor. There weren't even job descriptions for most of the things that we were doing. But I ended up running their global customer service organization, customer success. My title was Managing Director of Research Management, but really what that meant was taking care of all of our clients and making sure that they were happy. We went from about $25 million in revenue to $300 million in revenue over the 7.5 years I was there. And that was really, a rocket ship. The company was incredibly profitable, paid out. It was very shareholder friendly. And all of the people that had options or equity were able to participate, and it was great. Paid out lots of dividends and really made sure that the people that were investing in the company saw a return, which was incredible. And I came out of GLG in 2010, and for the last 10 years, prior to Revenue Collective, was leading and kind of chief revenue officer type person for early stage companies, primarily Series A and Series B companies, although, it varies based on the company. But a couple things were happening, particularly the last 10 years. So the first thing was that, as I mentioned, I worked at GLG for 7.5 years. I then worked at Axial, which is a venture-backed business in New York, focusing on the private equity industry for 4.5 years. I then worked at Livestream for 2 years. I then worked at the Muse as Chief Revenue Officer for 9 months, and I worked at Behavox for 10 months. And so if you're plotting those points on a graph for average tenure, you can see that it went from 7.5 years to 10 months over the course of 5 jobs. And so that was an issue for me, and that was a problem both for my career. But what I realized was that it wasn't just me that this was happening to. It was happening to a lot of different people. And when we did the research, we realized that the average tenure for somebody in a sales or marketing leadership position at a high growth company is just 17 months at this point. So on average, and I talk to lots of people that have worked places for 10, 15, 20 years, but on average, people are leaving jobs, under a year and a half. While the other thing that's happened over the last 10 years is just that the way that people go to market, the way that companies need to generate revenue obviously changes all the time. And new technology, new tech stacks, new functions. The SDR function was actually a rather new function 10 years ago, the sales development rep function. And now, now it's not clear where that role should sit, whether it should report to marketing or to sales. The definition of success for marketing was very different 10 years ago. 2 years ago, I didn't know what intent data was. And, I was trained that every piece of content that a company created needed to live behind a landing page where you captured an email address. Now in 2020, the idea is that landing pages and email capture is over, or at least in decline, and much more fashionable is to put cookies on people's browsers and just follow them all over the internet. And then when they're in market. My friend Latney Conant, the chief marketing officer at Sixth Sense, calls that the dark funnel. So the point is that two things have happened. Our tenure has shrunk, and we're in the middle of COVID as we record this, so that's even more prominent now, while the job becomes harder. And when I looked across at the communities that existed or basically the question of how I was going to navigate and negotiate my career over the next 10 to 20 to 50 to 25 years, I didn't have an answer for it. And I was making it up as I went along, and there wasn't a clear answer for how to become a CRO. There wasn't a clear answer for how to negotiate for a CRO. There wasn't a clear answer for what a CRO should be paid, or what you should negotiate for, or whether you should just accept every deal as it's presented. So and I looked at how was I going to do that? And I didn't have an answer. And so what I started to do was put together a dinner club that met every quarter in New York, that we called the New York Revenue Collective. And the point of it was just me and my friends sharing best practices and ideas and getting together to help each other and support each other. And the reason that, and I never thought that it would be a company at all. I just was doing it because I needed it. The classic founder as the customer story. I just needed somebody to talk to, Yeah. And so, we started doing that, and then, I hate to say one thing led to another, but one thing led to another. The thing that most surprised me was that I assumed that some kind of sales executive club existed already in every city in the country or in the world. And the reality is it didn't exist. And so this idea of a platform and a community that really the vision took shape over the course of the last couple of years, but a community where people can specifically go to manage and negotiate and navigate their career, not just be better. I see a lot of communities talk about the profession of sales, and that's fine, or the profession of marketing. I'm interested in those professions, obviously, because that's my background, but I'm much more interested in the human beings behind those professions. And Revenue Collective exists, and I can talk about why that's significant, or because it does exist in contrast to other communities that are not focused in quite the same way on the individual human being. That's what our focus is. Our focus is we want to take every person that's a member of Revenue Collective, and we want to help them achieve their potential. And however they define their potential, whatever that means to them, we want to put the tools and the answers to the test and the guidebook and the handbook and the playbook and whatever else you want to say. But we want to put the framework in place for people to more confidently navigate their careers so that you can achieve whatever it is that you feel is inside you that needs to be achieved. And that's, so that's my background. That's my origin story.
I appreciate it, and it makes a lot of sense. And when you speak through why Revenue Collective has taken hold, it's like common sense isn't common. So you have a role that's ever changing. You have a commercial landscape that's ever changing. Tenures are getting shorter. Environments are more difficult. Yet you don't have a support group that actually focuses on an individual's career. Now, I'm curious, in your opinion, at least, why was something like this, why was something like this not created to date? What is out there that Revenue Collective is in contrast to? Yeah,
it's a great question. The reason, I think there's probably a variety of different reasons. The perspective, the persona, my persona, sits in contrast to a couple of things. The first is that most of the time, the celebrities in the startup ecosystem are not you and me, Scott. They're not the operators. There's two celebrity types, right? They are investors and founders. And those are the heroes. And I think that most communities grew up either in specific subservience or in indirect fealty to those stewards, to those personas, right? So Vista Equity Partners, very famous private equity firm, one of the best SaaS investors over the last 20 years. They do a CMO. They have a CMO community. What's the underlying tension there? The underlying tension is that you have to be a CMO of a Vista company, and that the minute that you're not the CMO of a Vista company, you are no longer of meaningful interest to them. Now they might present as if, but there's a conflict of interest, because that is not about your career. That is about your ability to serve Vista's limited partners, to be direct.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at Axial and I left Axial, and Axial is a portfolio company of First Round Capital, which is one of the famous early stage investors, seed stage investors. They aspire to be the first round of capital into a lot of companies all over the country and the world. And they have a very famous, they have first round review. They put a lot of money into their platform, but they would call it a platform, and their content. And I remember that I was a member of their community while I was at Axial. And when I left Axial, my username and password no longer worked, and they were no longer interested in having me be part of their community. So thing number one is that communities have sprung up, but they have sprung up to serve ulterior motives. And there hasn't, and that's kind of one thing, which is that it's either that or the business model is conflicted. So what does that mean? That means that there are other communities, but most people maybe have some self-consciousness about charging. And then maybe they think that all communities should be free. I do not think that. Revenue Collective is a for-profit company that people pay dues to. So if I was going to do it for free and I wanted to make money, what would I need to do? Well, like they say, if you're not paying money and you're wondering what the product is, the likelihood is you're the product.
Yeah.
And so all of these other communities, yes, they're free, but but they all aspire to generate revenue. All of the people that run these communities obviously are passionate about them and want to make money. So how do you make money in a free community? Well, first of all, you sell sponsorships. And the way that you sell sponsorships, because it's free, is that you have to promise the sponsor, because they are your master, right? The people that pay the bills are ultimately your master. And so you have to promise to them that you're going to build as big an audience as possible. That's what they care about. So you're going to let in as many people as possible. And you don't have the luxury of cultivating or curating that community. You can't. Look at LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn, the purpose of LinkedIn is that every person is on it. So what happens when every person is on it? Well, there's people that you respect that have meaningful insights and relevant insights, and they're drowned out by the people that have the time to post on there all the time and really work their personal brand. And so you go on LinkedIn and, maybe you can learn something. And I actually don't have, a problem with LinkedIn. I do learn things from LinkedIn, but I'm the product. I know that I'm the product. And I think that's another reason that Revenue Collective exists, because we don't let everybody join, right? So we don't let investors join. We don't let founders join. We don't let executive search firms join. And we do let some consultants join, but most large-scale consulting firms we do not let join. And that means that when you join and when you pay your monthly dues or your annual dues, you know that it's a curated community, and you know that you're not the product because you're paying. So that the product is what you're paying for, which is the value that we aspire to deliver to you, so that you'll be happy and continue to renew your membership. So the construction of the business model is also something that sits in contrast to most communities, because most communities there's a playbook on how to monetize communities, but inevitably they all turn into you becoming the product in one way or the other. And so I think that's we took a stance at the very beginning. We weren't going to allow certain people to join, and we were going to charge money so that we could maintain some degree of independence. Even though we do have sponsor partners, their relationship with the community is very, very different than what I've seen from other places. And I think that decision at the outset of just building and the last point that I'll make is that, again, because I just think business model and incentives drive so much of behavior, as Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger will tell us, our decision to not try and monetize every nook and cranny, of the platform, of the community. It's just you pay a fat fee We do as many things as we can. We raise that fee over time so that new people pay more, but we pour as much value into that bucket as we possibly can. And that is our only incentive, as opposed to, oh, we sent you a job listing and we're going to have a 10% fee on the back end with the recruiter, or we're going to let you know that Salesforce is a sponsor, and every time somebody signs up for Salesforce, we're going to take 10%. There's no ulterior motive. There are no hidden incentives when you're a member of Revenue Collective. And again, I think that helps over time separate us, in addition to the values and vision that we have about your career.
I like that model a lot, and I actually wanted to point out one other thing, that even though you did say that you mentioned rather that you have some sponsorship, the sell to the sponsor is premised on the existing business model that you have a targeted group that doesn't let everybody in, that has a hyper specific community, and they know what they're getting into, and there's no illusion that will ever change. That's the core business principle, right? So even a sponsor going in knows that their audience is targeted and limited. And that's important, because they're never going to expect more from you in terms of widening your base to every investors, founders, whatever it may be, that wasn't part of your core offering.
Yeah,
when they first signed up.
That's right. And also, because sponsors are 10% of our revenue, not 100%, we can turn people away. Yeah. And we can also say, we're not going to give you their email addresses, and we're particularly not going to give you their email addresses if you're going to give those emails to an SDR to pound their inbox. Yeah. They signed up for one webinar and they get 22 emails every day from different people at the company. We work hard to try and make that not the case. So the community makes sense. The way it's set up makes a lot of sense. Now let's speak about the people that are in it. So the commercial operators, CROs, VP sales. Let's first define what it is to be that individual in a company today outside of the limited tenure. What does a job description look like? Well, again, and we called it revenue for intentionally, not sales collector or marketing collective, because we include marketers, salespeople, and customer success people, and even operations people that support those. And that's the point. Is also speaks to my perspective on how is revenue generated. It's not just the sales team, right? It's the collective effort. It's really the collective effort of the whole company, but at least, and if we're going to be more specific, it includes the alignment and the interaction of the sales, marketing, customer success professionals that are working to generate, revenue. So within that world, if you're in charge of sales, you are a person responsible for closing the deals. You're responsible for building the team, managing the sales team, managing different revenue channels, potentially, including channel partnerships, in addition to, inside sales and outside sales and field sales. If you're the CMO or the chief marketing officer, or you're the VP of marketing, primarily in the modern world, and I think in many ways, marketing is more interested, more complicated, and more difficult than sales, because it covers so many different things. But if you're the CMO, your job is every day, again, the most recent modern parlance would be your job is to generate pipeline. I think that the actual job of a chief marketer is beyond that and is more nuanced, because your job is also to elevate and support the brand. Now, the other people that have a big role on the brand is, everybody else, including the sales team, the product team, and the customer success team, because the best way to build a great brand is to build something that people truly love, and then they will tell their friends. So that it's not just the marketer's responsibility, but it is the marketer's responsibility to take the feelings that people have about a brand and turn that into direct, actionable language. But and then the customer success people, ultimately their job is to make sure that once you sign up a customer, they don't leave. And so, across that journey of creating awareness, attention and interest, using that AIDA framework, that's the marketer's job. And then decision and action, that is the salesperson job. And then long-term longevity and renewals, that's the customer success job. And those are all hard jobs anyway. But in today's world, so what is it about today's world? Well, money is free in today's world. So what does that mean? That means that the venture capital asset class has never had more money and has never had more funds. And I think I saw a chart over the weekend. So there are more investors because money is free, right? And if you are looking for returns, you have lots of equity capital to invest, and that means that you're going to invest it, and that means that there are going to be more companies that are seeking that capital, and that means that it's going to be more competitive, and that means that many, many, many more companies are going to be pursuing similar personas, similar business problems, similar solutions. And that means that your job is harder while all of this venture capital has gone into these companies. And venture capital, the definition of it is it seeks, an extraordinary growth rate. It seeks extraordinary returns. Now, one of the issues in my experience is that the returns are not, venture capital doesn't describe an outcome. Really, it's just capital. So, but they all seek the same outcome. And they because, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They have money. They assume that the thing that creates great outcomes is money. And when they pay the money, they expect the great outcome. And what that means is that thousands and thousands and thousands of companies have growth targets that are probably elevated and artificial relative to their actual potential, and they feel tremendous pressure to pursue those growth targets. And finally, the end of our story, that puts pressure on the sales and marketing talent. And of course, because there are so many more companies, the quality of the talent and the relative training of that talent is probably much more diffuse. Many more people inexperienced in these jobs, and they need support and they need help to be effective at those jobs. And that's, again, where Revenue Collective comes into play.
And I guess the point I was making with the commercial operator or the revenue operator, and you widened it out to sort of help me understand like the scope of who's in the actual collective. But I was curious about the point that you made earlier about the CRO VP sales, that tenure keeps decreasing. Explain why that tenure keeps decreasing and how Revenue Collective seeks to mitigate that to an extent. Because you didn't mention like customer success. You didn't mention those leaders are, they're only sitting in a company for, 17 months. You didn't mention marketing leaders, or perhaps this is the case. I don't know. I want to put words in your mouth. But I'm curious as to, I guess sales holds the bag. They're the ones that are getting hit the hardest with not hitting these accelerated revenue targets or whatnot. So how does Revenue Collective help them?
Well, and to your point, customer success is slightly longer, but marketers are very much in the bucket of the salespeople with declining average tenure. And I think that you mentioned, like, what are the reasons for that? So one of the reasons is the proliferation of capital and the number of companies and the quality of talent being spread across a much greater number of companies. That's probably one reason. The other reason is that there is a point of view that people are stage specific, right? And that you are the leader for the 0 to 10 million range of the company, but we're going to need somebody different for 10 to 30 million, and we're going to need somebody other than that for 30 to 100. And I think that there's there's negative feedback loop that's in play where sales and marketing people are viewed as interchangeable. We are treated interchangeably, thus we act interchangeably, and I think all of this is perpetuating itself. So Revenue Collective seeks to address that in three primary ways. The first is we want to help people get better at their job so that they can stay longer. And I think one of the things we want to do is market that we make people better at their job so that the companies have more confidence that any given leader, whoever she or he may be, can scale to a specific revenue range. Mm-hmm. And we do that by providing access to the community itself, which provides real-time insights. You can go ask a question and get 15 people that have been there, done that to answer it quickly. So we want to help you get better at your job. And we take all of these interactions that people have and we create content from it. So we create workbooks and playbooks and we make them instantly accessible. We create webinars. And over time, we really want to create, I don't know if we'll call it this because there's so many people calling things that, but something like a Revenue Collective University. But basically, when you become a Revenue Collective member, you have the chaos of just meeting all of the people and getting to know people and building those intimacy and those relationships, but also that from all of those people and their insights, we've built structured programs so that you can sign up for the CRO program or for the VP sales program. So, that's part of what we want to do. Now, the second thing we want to do is we want to help you find a job. If we can't help you get better, or if we've gotten you as far as we can go, then the other thing we need to be the nexus. We need to be the central clearinghouse for every executive go-to-market position, or at least we need to aspire to be that, so that you always feel like you can find a job. And that's where our business model is very, very important, as I mentioned. Why? Because we don't want to take referral fees from recruiters. We don't want to be a recruiter. The number one thing someone will tell you if you start a community is you should start a recruiting firm. I'm never going to start a recruiting firm. I have absolutely no interest in starting a recruiting firm. I don't like transactional revenue. I like recurring revenue. And so there's a huge benefit to that. What is the benefit? We can work with every recruiting firm because we have no interest in their economics. We actually want to help them. We think that if we help people connect to great recruiters and great hiring managers and they find jobs, they're just more likely to renew their membership. And if we're leaving a little bit of money on the table, that's great. We're happy to do that because we want to play for a much longer term. So we want to help you get better at your job. We want to help you find a new job if you need to. And the final piece of it is we want to arm you with the right information and insights so that you can negotiate more effectively for that job. Because I personally, I'm impatient and I get bored easily. And maybe the right tenure for me is 9 months. Maybe the Muse had it right. I don't have a point of view. This isn't there's no like bad guy, good guy. This isn't a moral argument. This is an argument that if we're all going to work places a year and a half, then the deal that is presented to us needs to change, because it has become unfairly skewed to the company, or again, use of the word fair is a little tenuous. But I want to renegotiate, right? I want to renegotiate. If I'm going to work somewhere a year and a half, and I'm going to help them get from point A to point B, which is incredibly valuable, then you're going to have to pay me differently. And that's okay. So let's figure that out. And so there's a number of ways that we coach people so that they can have more information and more confidence going into negotiations to anticipate some of these challenges.
That was going to be, I guess, my next question, because you have, coming from a sales and marketing background in my career, I align with a lot of the things that you're saying, but when you look at the reality, you see these interchangeable roles where you see these VP sales getting the marketing department added on to their list of things and roles and responsibilities, and the commercial environment is not synced up with, I would say, the commercial environment at large. I don't think is synced up with what you're preaching within Revenue Collective. So when you have these two conflicting forces where you have perhaps founders that are a little bit outdated and they aren't working with perhaps the best venture capital firm that's giving them the right advice on who to hire, who to look for, how do you navigate that workforce? How do you navigate which companies to work for? What are the red flags that you should look for when you go take on your next role or your next job to make sure that it aligns with the way that a company should be hiring and managing and onboarding and setting their executives up for success?
Well, there's a lot of questions in that.
I know there's a ton. I was just thinking through. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's what I do too. Yeah. I think so. There's a couple pieces. The first thing is, and I do part of what we offer our members is coaching calls. So I was on one yesterday, which was a Sunday, talking to a member, and she was a consultant that was interviewing. She'd been a consultant for a really long time and hadn't taken on a full-time role. So we're kind of going through things. And the first thing is, before we talk about negotiation or red flags, we have to understand the labor market. Mm-hmm. Because if there's no jobs and you need to pay your mortgage or pay your rent or put your kids through private school, then some of what I'm about to say is less relevant, because the first things first, you got to take care of yourself, and leverage changes. If it was the employment market 9 months ago, we would have probably more leverage. Now the VC funding environment right now is actually quite hot, but the point is, I can't speak to your personal circumstance, and depending on how many choices you have and how much leverage you have, that'll determine the extent to which you use my advice. Now, the second part of it is that, again, it's less about kind of red flags, although I can give you a couple red flags. I mean, if they won't share information with you and you're an executive, and really if you're an employee and the company won't share information with you, what kind of information? What was the most recent funding round? What did it value the company at? How many shares are outstanding? What's the price per share? Has anybody sold secondary? Meaning, has anybody taken money off the table in the moments leading up to joining the company? Let me see your previous board decks. Have you hit the number? What was the number? Are you giving me the plan, or do I have to, again, red flag is we've set a growth target of X. Scott, you're obligated to hit X when you join. And if you don't hit X by 9 months from now, you're fired, is obviously a red flag, since you didn't have any opportunity to weigh in and to build that plan yourself. So there's a number of ways that people might run an interview process. I would also say that, frankly, anybody that's pushing speed, speed in an executive interview process, I think is a red flag, right? These are supposed to be, you're trying to work there for longer than 18 months, right? This is supposed to be if it's not a great marriage, it's not going to last 20 years, but we don't want it to be a 2-year marriage. We want it to last a while, at least have a kid or two. So, So I think if people are rushing the interview process, that's a big problem. And of course, people are obligated to do their own due diligence. But the main things that I would say are, in terms of like, how are we trying to change this? How are we trying to change the structure? Is really around, the idea is that you go to work for a startup and you get paid probably below market relative to a big enterprise company in cash. But that's because you get above market in terms of the equity opportunity. And the reason that many of us work at startups is because we've all read about the person that worked at Slack or Facebook or Google, and even like some of the most famous investors they were just early employees at Facebook and Google. So that's why we join startups. That's why we join these early stage companies, for the equity opportunity. Okay, well, the equity framework doesn't make a lot of sense given a couple of things: how long it takes the company to go public, how long you are expected to work there, all related to the structure of the equity that they issue you, which is a long way of saying that most people get equity which vests over a 4-year, these are options, they're granted options over a 4-year period, let alone the 1-year cliff, which we can talk about. But so if you're only working somewhere a year and a half, and a meaningful part of your compensation is intended to become real over 4 years, there's an obvious disconnect there. It's just very clear, 1.5 to 4 years. The other part of it is, the reason that options are on a 4-year vest is because companies typically, in the olden days, took 4 years to go public, because they could go public at much smaller sizes, because of the regulatory requirements around filing and becoming a public company were less. So now they take much longer. So what happens is they take longer, where more investors come in, they raise more money, you get diluted more. If you're only going to work there a 1.5 years, it means that the event, the place where you can turn this equity, which is a meaningful part of why you're working at a startup in the first place, the place where you can turn that equity into cash, which is the point of all finance, turn it into cash, is way down the road, when probably you won't be there, and you will have much less influence in terms of who gets it, how it gets it, and et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is a long-winded way of saying that let's rethink this. Let's rethink it. Let's say maybe you keep the equity. Maybe you don't work for equity, but maybe you work for milestone-based cash bonuses that function very similarly to equity. If I'm going to take a company, this is my favorite, one of my favorite comparisons, and sorry for being long-winded, but if I'm going to take a company from $2 million in annual recurring revenue, $2 million in revenue, to $10 million in revenue, which could take about 1.5 years, right? That's a common journey for an early stage VP sales, VP marketing. Well, what are you doing between 2 and 10? $2 million is not, yes, it's a company, I get it, but it's not really a company. And what do I mean by that? The investors are, the reason that you pay more money at later stages is because you've removed risk from the business model. At $2 million, there's still a tremendous amount of risk. A tremendous amount of risk, not just about whether the market is truly there, but about whether the way you've designed your company is the right way to do it to attach that market. So you come in at $2 million. Now, what is $10 million? $10 million, you have removed a tremendous amount of risk. Companies that have $10 million in revenue can typically, unless they're completely mismanaged, find some path to profitability, especially if they're software companies, right? $10 million, that's a hard company to kill. That's pretty hard. 10 million is a lot of money. Now, it may not seem like that if we're all working at, Salesforce and they're doing billions in revenue, but that's the truth of the matter. So you've taken something, you've been part of the team that's taken something from high risk, really uncertain, to we've removed, now we're just trying to figure out how much is it going to be worth, but we know it's going to be a company, that 2 to 10 journey. Well, if you were there 1.5 years, again, a small portion of your options are vested. You might have raised money at a massive financing round that didn't give you the opportunity to sell anything and put the company so far over its skis in terms of valuation. So instead of and you might just get fired, by the way, because the 2 to 10 person is likely going to be different than the 10 to 30 person. Mm-hmm. So instead of this structure where you've contributed a massive amount of value and have not really received anything commensurate in return, what if at the moment that you hit 10 million in revenue or 8 million in revenue, you get a $250,000 cash bonus? Instead of the points of equity, which are probably not going to be as meaningful anyway, or maybe you get half the equity. What if you have an opportunity to sell your equity earlier and take money off the table, so that at least you can realize some of the gains? Or what if you had the opportunity to not have to exercise your equity 90 days after leaving the company? All of these are very specific startup, practices. But again, I just think that they're outdated. And so I think that, what people need to do is arm themselves with information and then confidence, because that's the other part of it. I think a lot of sales and marketing people, we don't deal with investors all the time, and we're not founders. And so we haven't had to set up a cap table and do all of the things. Mm-hmm. And we're just much more comfortable arguing or negotiating about cash. But I do think that the other part of it is if we can give people the right information and the right confidence to more confidently discuss equity, they can have the confidence to realize that all of this is negotiable. There's nothing that's not negotiable, and that they can change it if they have the confidence to change it. And we're seeing that with Revenue Collective. The final piece I would say is severance. Again, like the last part of compensation, and the thing that I really strongly feel like every executive should be arguing and negotiating very forcefully for severance, pre-negotiated severance, so that, again, what I want is, I don't mind working somewhere a year and a half. It's okay if you fire me after 10 months, but it's much better if I've pre-negotiated 12 months of severance. That makes that decision much more expensive for you. And that means that it's got to be meaningful. You've got to think about it. And that's okay. You should think about it. You should think about it before you hire me. You shouldn't, we are not interchangeable, and I'm not coin operated. And if you want to treat me like that, I'm going to make it much more expensive for you to treat me like that, so that maybe you can think about it a little bit. So
I like it a lot. And I think that, I was actually going to bring up a point that you just ended up going and touching on anyways, but a lot of I keep saying sales because it's my background. A lot of individuals, executives who perhaps haven't been as tenured, I don't know, not putting age on it, but younger, they wouldn't have had this experience before. They don't know what they can and cannot negotiate. They don't understand all the nuances of all these different arrangements. Even negotiating severance is something that they may not feel comfortable doing unless it's been presented in roles before. And if they're coming from working in a company for 10 years and they moved up and now they want to pivot into startup land, this will be their first foray into having the ability to negotiate with quite literally the founder at that stage. So I'm assuming now that you're speaking through it, these are all things that they can learn from Revenue Collective, from the community. These are all people that can support them. I don't know if there's like legal or whatnot in the community, but I'm sure there's some people that have tons of experience with this, that on your own, this is scary as hell to go in and negotiate.
Exactly right. And and again, it speaks to the business model again, because we don't sell. Now, people do get their dues expensed, but we don't sell to the company. We sell to the individual. The individual goes back to their hiring manager, their CEO. But that's all intentional, because we want to be. There is no other place, in my experience, where you can get these questions answered. There's many, many places to figure out who should SDRs report to, or, how should we set up the comp plan? Should it be meetings set or meetings held? But where do you go to figure out, is this the right amount of money? I'm actually pretty scared. They've offered this to me. Does this sound fair to you? And again, my call yesterday, because I do these calls, every day with members, the woman was, does this sound fair? I said, no, it doesn't. It's not fair. It's not right. Yeah. And there hasn't been. That's what you want. That's the thing that's helpful. That's the thing that'll help you sleep at night, is knowing that there's a group of people that are not subservient to investors. I'm not trying to please First Round Capital or Vista Equity Partners. I don't have anything against them, but I don't exist to please them. I exist to please the people that work for them. They're my members. So, yes, those are questions that can be answered. And again, I think that the biggest thing that surprises people is how, no matter what they say, I don't care what they say, I don't care what the general counsel says or what the founder says, well, this is the equity package that we issue all of our employees, and we would never change it for just one person. Okay, well, maybe you should change it for all of the employees then. Or at least you should have classes, and you should have an executive class equity package and a non-executive class equity package. But these things are changeable, and you can change them. And I'll give you a specific example. I was working at Axial, and I didn't know I was in that position that you're talking about. I was an early VP. I didn't know what to ask for. And all of a sudden, the CFO one day comes and he puts a piece of paper in front of me that is a paperwork to sign that is an amendment to their equity stock option plan that gives me, as the option holder, a double trigger full acceleration. So double trigger full acceleration is you have options that are unvested. The company is sold. That's the first trigger. And then something happens to you, like you're fired. That's the second trigger. So let's say a big company like Salesforce buys your sales engagement company. They that happens, and then they say, you know what, we don't need a VP of sales, but you can be senior director of field for the Toronto region. And you say, well, that's not really the job I had. I used to be SVP of global sales. They say, sorry, if you don't want that job, then you don't work here anymore. Those would be the two triggers. Upon that, your unvested equity accelerates so that you can get the full benefit, the full realization of the value of that acquisition. All right, so that's a term that's fairly common. I hadn't heard of it. Somebody put a piece of paper in front of me to sign to give me that right. How did that happen? That's because we were interviewing a VP of marketing, and she said, I'm not going to join the company unless there's double trigger full acceleration. And they said, well, then we would have to do that for all the executives. And she said, then do it for all the executives. And guess what? All of the executives got the term. So, if anybody's out there listening, or I know that it feels scary, and it should. And again, remember all of this against my first caveat, which is if you don't have leverage, then you don't have leverage. But if you do have leverage, you should at least know what's possible, and you should know that things can be changed. If they want you bad enough, things can be changed.
I like that a lot. It's refreshing because there's a lot of people that come on the show that speak about, like you mentioned, like strategy on how to do this better, how to do that better. But I don't think I've ever spoken to somebody on how to negotiate your professional. It's something that you're right. I've never heard of it before. I've never heard of a group that does this at all. So it's, hats off to you for doing this, and hopefully it continues to grow. I think that you see Revenue Collective all over LinkedIn. So it's obviously, you have 3,000 members, obviously doing something. So hopefully, when COVID is maybe a little bit subsided and people do have a little bit more leverage, that's when they can start taking advantage of some of these things. If not, just keeping it top of mind right now. Right, as they go into potentially new work environments, like hopefully the economy is turning around a bit. I know a lot of people were laid off, so this is when they have to exercise that, right? If they want to go in and negotiate all these different options you mentioned. Now that being said, I want to just ask you some questions based on your career, your experience, just like personal insight that I like to draw out from somebody who's done so much over their career. Before I pivot, is there anything that I didn't ask about Revenue Collective that I should have asked? No.
I think if folks are intrigued or interested or you want to learn more, you can go to revenuecollective.com. There's an application process. You click on Apply Now. We've got communities and chapters. It is COVID, so, it's a digital-first community. Mm-hmm. But we've got people everywhere in the world. We've got, we just signed our chapter heads for Sydney, Australia, and they're going to cover Melbourne and Perth for now, in Brisbane, Charlotte, North Carolina, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Birmingham, Alabama. And, we've got Manchester, UK, Stockholm, Sweden. So, anywhere you are in the world, if you want to become a member, we'd love to talk to you.
Very good. Now, in terms of the evolution of these executive roles within organizations, it's something that you're understanding all the time. You're looking for new ways to improve how an executive can transition and negotiate into a new role, as well as just other ancillary topics that will help them be successful in their role. What are you curious about, or what are you investigating in the world of leadership? What are people looking to incorporate, or what should people focus on bringing into their own persona as a leader that can help them accelerate in their role right now? Something that isn't as common.
Well, I don't. Here's one thought. This is something that I've just been thinking about a lot. I think that people need to be as invested in their career as a professional athlete would be invested in their career. That is something I would share with people. Professional athlete reviews game film. Professional athlete has a nutritionist. They have a weights trainer. They have people that help them get better at each facet. I don't see enough people, and this is speaking my book, so there's an obvious conflict here, but I don't see enough people making investments in their career. Besides a community like Revenue Collective, because I honestly don't. You need to be part of something. You need to have some kind of mentorship or some kind of group where you can go, and it doesn't have to be my group, but you need some group where you can go and ask people that you trust and respect how to do something, what to do, what they think about something that you haven't experienced before. But the other part of it is that I think more people should investigate coaching, hiring coaches. It's something is just internalizing the concept that there is an advocate that only speaks for you, that doesn't come from your company, that you pay for out of pocket, that helps you get better as an individual, and that helps you address perhaps things that are long-standing challenges or impediments to your personal growth and development. And I specifically would contrast that with a therapist. I don't think mental health is incredibly important, and so it's not about. This is just for me personally, but for me personally, I've tried both therapy and working with a coach, and I've gotten practical, actionable. Like, my life has changed the more I've worked with a really good coach, and I didn't get a lot of benefit from traditional talk therapy. So, I think as people we're in a volatile world, and we know that, and you need to arm yourself with personal resources. This is like a very random anecdote, but I don't want the company to buy my computer. If I were to ever work for somebody again, which I hope not to, but if I ever work for somebody again, they're not buying my computer, and I'm not asking them to. I don't want you to own my computer. You don't get to. I'm like a free agent athlete. Mm-hmm. I bring a coach. I bring a graphic designer, by the way. If you're a leader out there and you don't have access to your own personal contract freelance graphic designer so that you can put together your own presentations and they look good, it's enough with like the terrible, like, you're advertising, particularly more experienced people. Sometimes you're advertising your age when you put together decks that just look like absolute dog shit, and you're like going into a final round interview, you just look like grandpa or grandma. Yeah. Don't want to do that. So you need to surround yourself with an arsenal of resources that are dedicated to you evolving as a human being, not about the companies subsidizing all of this for you. Because again, if we're all going to work places a year and a half, it's just like a hockey player or a football player or a baseball player. So they all have their own weights trainer, they all have their own coach, they all have their own hitting instructor. We all, as leaders, we need to do that. We need to arm ourselves, and we are fully formed, autonomous executives that can parachute into a company. If they want to treat us transactionally, that's fine, and we will have the ongoing resources necessary to help us navigate this difficult environment. And again, that's sort of the point of Revenue Collective.
Do you find that executives are doing that more often, creating this almost this machine that supports them when they go into different, because that's outside of what I think most people think of when they apply for a job. They think, I don't want to spend my money on this. I don't want to spend this is, I'll just expense it. This is part of the company. They should be paying for this. They should be paying for my coaching, my executive training. Do you find that more executives are just taking that initiative on their own to take control of their own career?
I hope so. Okay. You got to understand, I don't care what the person says about confidentiality. The person that's paying the bills is the boss. And I do think that executives need to be a little bit more long. You need to invest in yourself. It needs to be an investment. You need to be prepared to spend your own money on getting better. And if you're just like, well, I won't do that unless I can expense it, you're just shortchanging yourself. You just have to have a bigger picture view of the world. This is not about every single time you do something, sending in the receipt to get it expensed. Mm-hmm. This is about you building a career in a world that is not going to help you unless you help yourself.
That's very powerful. It's a very different view of career than what I think a lot of people expect. But I think it's an effective view of career. I think it's, I see a lot of people that try and build, we talk about building a brand. I think that building a brand is a lot more than just a couple posts on social media. I think that what you're speaking about is your brand extends far deeper, and now you have your own little team working for you, basically, essentially.
We're all again, some of the 18-month thing isn't, nobody's at fault. There's no enemy. This is the way the world is now. We're all impatient. We all want instant results. And if that's going to be the way the world is, then we need to prepare ourselves for it.
Yeah. And to be quite honest, if you aren't transitioning from jobs every 18 months, or even if you are and you're better protecting yourself, the expenses will pay for themselves. So
exactly.
It negates the cost. Okay. Two more quick questions. This one's a little simple, but I still like to understand your point of view. What would be one lesson across your entire career that you would tell your younger self?
The biggest one is, I always say the person that takes their life seriously the soonest is the person that will win. I could probably think of a more pithy way of saying that or articulating it, but the problem with me as a human being, and to the point of the vision of Revenue Collective, unlock your potential, because for most of my life I felt like I had potential that was not being exercised, and that is because I had a lot of early success as a very young person in school, and I got used to this idea that success came easily, and I could do, with a moderate amount of effort, I could achieve exceptional results. And the real world has a way of slapping you in the face when you think about that. And I just think I wished I'd started running sooner. I wish that I'd worked harder. I wish that I had spent less than I made sooner, and that I'd learned. But, that's just... I could tell that to my younger self. I don't know if my younger self would have believed it, because the way that you learn things is the hard way, which is through experience. But I fundamentally believe that. I fundamentally believe that if I had just worked, if I had been more diligent, taken things more seriously, focused more on hard work as early as possible, I would have achieved great things. But the only way I know that is through what I've experienced. So I don't even know if it makes sense sometimes to say those things.
No, but it may not make sense to your younger self, when you were younger. But if somebody's listening, hopefully they take that to heart. That's all you can hope. And then they don't have to. Experience is the ultimate teacher. But if they can shortcut some of that experience with a little bit of self-awareness and aligning with people that have done it before,
you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, that helps too. And then last question before I get some websites and socials from you. What does success mean to you? And most importantly, where do people connect with you? Where do people go find out more about the Revenue Collective? Give me some links so we can go check out.
Sure. As I mentioned, so first, if you want to email me, you can, sam@revenuecollective.com. Maybe mention that you heard me on the podcast. That would help. If you want to check out Revenue Collective, revenuecollective.com. If you want to apply, click Apply Now. We have a program for executives and we have a program for associates, so people that are on their way up that are not yet at the executive level. You can find us on LinkedIn as well, linkedin.com/the word in/Sam F. Jacobs. Those are the big ones.